Shalom uvracha to everyone. It's Thursday afternoon, the week of Parshat Devarim, Erev Shabbat Chazon, getting ready for the Shavua Shechalbo, the week in which Tisha B'Av occurs this year. And of course, we continue to daven on behalf of anyone who's ill. Wish everybody to be safe and healthy. Especially with the heat, make sure that you're well hydrated. I want to wish a special Mazel Tov to Netanel Halevi, whose bar mitzvah is this Shabbat. In our second minyan, we're going to have two minyanim this coming Shabbat day. Parshat Devarim, of course, begins a new sefer on the cusp of entering the land of Israel. The Jewish people are ready to enter. And it's interesting, sometimes when you speak to people and you ask them what's Sefer Dvarim, so they tell you the Sefer Dvarim is Mishneh Torah. The rabbis call it the second Torah. It's a repetition of many of the laws of the Torah. However, the first part of Sefer Dvarim is not necessarily law, it's a narrative. In fact, Sefer Dvarim is seen as a book of speeches. There are many speeches here. What's called Ne'um. There are actually three major speeches in the book. The first, Pasuk Perek Aleph through Daled, the first through the fourth chapter, is the Umai Story, Moshe Rabbeinu's historical overview. The second part of the book focuses on the mitzvot. And the third part of the book, and that goes from chapter 5 through chapter 26. The last part of the book is what we call Ne'um HaBrit, the book of the covenantal period, or the book of covenants, where it talks about how all the mitzvot basically are part of entering into covenant with God, and the sanctions on the covenant, what we call the tochacha, the reproof, what's going to happen when you come into the land of Israel, and it ends off with the future, what the Jewish people are going to do in the land of Israel, what's going to happen if they don't live up to the covenant, and Moshe's final words, farewell, as he blesses the people for the future. When we look at the first speech, the Umai Story, it actually seems to be a little of a misnomer, because it doesn't really give an overview of the major events of Jewish history. One would have expected, if Moshe Rabbeinu is engaging in a historical overview of the past, we would have a lengthy description of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the drama of the Exodus, where Moses played such a central role, the 10 plagues, the back and forth, how the Jews left Egypt. We would have had a description of many of the events that occurred primarily at Har Sinai. We would have had a lengthy description at this point in chapters 1, 2, 3 of Har Sinai, of the events at Sinai, of the giving of the Torah, of the giving of the revelation, of the experience of the people. We would have had a description of many of the other events that occurred during the 40 years in the desert. The man, this, that. And yet that's not what we have in these first three chapters. It is a very selective, cherry-picked presentation of history. And I'm not going into the differences between the way the story is presented here versus the stories as they happen themselves. That's an interesting discussion in and of itself. Part of we'll talk about some of that in the Chumash year on Sunday morning. And I encourage everyone. We have a number of touch points where we as a community can get together, everyone, on Zoom, including Kabbalat Shabbat, and including Havdalah, and including Sunday morning davening on Zoom together with the Shir. I really encourage everyone who can come to participate in as many things as possible. But if you look carefully at the events, Moshe Rabbeinu cherry picks which events he's going to discuss. He talks about the establishment that you asked to establish a judicial system and a leadership system. He talks about the story of the Meraglim. And then in chapter 2 and 3, he talks about the wars. He skips over 38 years of history. We don't talk about. He talks about the stories of entering the land of Israel. Almost the battles with Sichon and Og, and Edom and Moab, and the lack of battles, and what we did and what we didn't do. Notice, talks about asking for the leadership roles, and he talks about how the people asked to send scouts, spies, to spy out the land before they enter the land. That's all. Doesn't talk about many of the other critical stories in Tanakh. And it's pretty clear that his focus is all about how the people were ready to enter the land. They were ready to enter the land. The people asked for leadership. They asked for shoftim. They asked for leaders. And we arranged it. We were all ready to go. And then the debacle of the miraglim, of the scouts, happened. And then he skips and he talks about how they were ready and they fought and they were all ready to listen to God and enter the land. There's no doubt that that's a focus, but I just want to highlight one other point. What's very interesting in the book of Devarim is that Moshe Rabbeinu emphasizes that the people asked for the judges. The people asked for the miraglim. The people did the story of the Ma'apilim and went up against God's explicit requests. Moshe talks about how the people handled their interaction with Sichon and Og and how they fought. It's very much a focus on the people taking responsibility. Sometimes they mess up. Sometimes they fail. But it's very much the people. Moshe says, you asked, you came to me and asked. It's a different presentation than what happened necessarily in Bamidbar. It's very much a focus on what the people did and what the people asked and how the people are going to have to take responsibility. And now Joshua is going to lead you. And just like you fought, you're going to be able to do that and conquer the land of Israel. And there's no discussion of miracles. There's no discussion of all that stuff. That is all missing. And part of that is the message here. The message of that as they're leaving the desert, their existence is moving from a purely miraculous existence to a much more natural existence of them having to take responsibility and take leadership roles. To move from the desert where you lived on man and you lived on miracles to moving into Eretz Yisrael where you're going to have to step up for yourself. And sometimes you're going to make mistakes. And sometimes you're going to mess up. And there's going to be tremendous consequences. But in the land of Israel, with miracles, there's still going to be miracles, but there's going to be much more of the day-to-day life of establishing a polity, of taking responsibility, of not being a child anymore, of not being Haben Yakir li Ephraim, Zacharti lach chesed nurayich, of not going to be that way. There's going to be a lot more, less hand-holding. You're going to have to take responsibility. Responsibility for the polity that you create. Responsibility for your interaction with the nations around you. Responsibility for defense and welfare. And all the things that you have to do of growing up as we move from the existence in the desert to entering the land of Israel and taking responsibility. This week we enter the world of the 9 days, the world of the mistakes that we made and the consequences of those mistakes, and the loss of Jewish sovereignty and the loss of the Beit HaMikdash. But it also means that it's within our power to restore it. If our actions were the ones that caused the consequences, we are the ones who can emerge out of it by our actions. It's not simply that we wait for miracles to happen. Geula in the Torah is dependent on what we do. In the book of Devarim, it's about the tshuva, the kind of turn that we make back to God, the kind of responsibility that we assume about making a better society. If the society that we created did not have the social justice that the Nevi'im wanted, it did not have the sincerity of Avodat Hashem that the Nevi'im wanted, then we have the power to change that. We have the power. That's what Chazal say. Kol dor shalom nivneh bo Beit HaMikdash kilu nechrav. Any generation that the Beit HaMikdash has not been rebuilt, it's as if it's destroyed, because we are not change agents. We have not become enough of change agents to restore Chadesh Ameinu Kekedem, bring us back to what it was like. But that's also the great potential. We don't have to wait for miracles. We have the ability to take responsibility and become the change that we see, as they say, and become the change that we want. I want to wish everyone a wonderful Shabbat, wish everyone a wonderful week, a meaningful fast, an easy fast. Be careful in terms of dehydration and all those other things on the fast day, and be careful. And as we say during this period of time, B'tzipiyah Yeshua, with longing and yearning and hope for redemption speedily in our day, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Shabbat Shalom.